はい、では始めましょう。皆さん、ダグラス・ブルックスさんが今日ゲストとして来てくださいました。でそれで、2019年にもダグラスさんに来ていただいてとても面白かったので、また2022年に来ていただきました。でそれで、図書館の下のレベルに船がありますよね。その船を作られたのがブルックさんです。それもちろん他にもたくさんありますが、でそれで、ブルックスさんはこの発表を英語でします。いいですね。ですから今から6時半までプレッジを解除します。6時半で6時31分からはここだけです。いいですね。はい。じゃあ、ブルックさんの紹介をお願いします。はい、
最初から日本語でしますけど、次から、はい、英語でします。ブルックさんはアメリカ、日本、ヨーロッパの伝統的な木造船の製作を専門としていらっしゃいます。博物館の依頼でレプリカを制作したり、個人のクライアントのために新しい木造船を作ってこられました。また、木造船の設計やロフティング、製作前に実物大の船を描く技術、伝統的な製作法の指導なども行ってこられました。すみません。海洋史と造船などの雑誌にも定期的に記事を発表していらっしゃいます。では、ブルックさん、よろしくお願いいたします。Douglas Brooks specializes in making traditional wooden boats in the United States, Japan, and Europe. At the request of museums and the like, he has made replicas of historical boats, as well as new wooden boats for personal clients. He has also provided guidance on the planning and designing of boats via lofting, a method of drawing a given boat full scale before its production, as well as traditional manufacturing methods. He regularly publishes articles in magazines such as Maritime History and Shipbuilding. Without further ado, I give over to Mr. Brooks for his presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, how many folks are Ichinensei? We don't have a single Ichinensei here.
What, you mean like in college?
First year here.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. So, for the summer, right, Ichinensei. So, 22 years ago, I was Ichinensei here. I got a large grant that took me to Japan for an entire year to study with 2 different boat builders, and that grant paid for me to come to language school. One of the ironies is that every single one of my teachers in Japan said to me the first day, there will be absolutely no speaking in the workshop. And so ironically, and I had already done 2 apprenticeships before I came to language school here, and my Japanese, just self-studying, was incredibly rudimentary. So the irony was, I could apprentice with craftspeople in Japan without the language, because I was not allowed to use the language anyway. And even as my language abilities improved, my teachers would always say to me, you know, at lunch break or cigarette break, you can ask me questions. But when I would ask questions, the answer was either mite wakaru or mate wakaru. Watch and you will understand, or wait and you will understand. So really, there was really no use for language in the workshop. My slide presentation is just going to go chronologically through my 9 apprenticeships with Japanese boat builders from throughout Japan. First one here on Sado Island, the Sea of Japan, the next 2 in Tokyo Bay, Third one up here, way up here in Aomori. Fourth one down in Okinawa. Fifth one in the tsunami zone, Iwate. I'm losing count myself. Six was the cormorant fishing boats in Gifu. That was my first freshwater boat. 6, 7, 8. I'm lost count. And then most recently in 2019, the Niigata mainland, a riverboat, and over here on the Noto Peninsula, a seaboat. So, without further ado, as the introduction said, maybe some of you recognize this boat, and I'm sorry, I do have to manipulate my computer. I'm sorry if I'm in the way. I can step back. What famous anime film features this boat? Spirited Away. Thank you very much. It's the only anime I've ever watched because I wanted to see the boat. In my first trip to Japan in 1990, I went to Sado Island because I had heard about these legendary boats and in fact found a very living craft tradition. These are still being made. And at the time I was there were actually 2 builders of these boats. These are fishing boats. They are traditionally used by women. They were only invented about 150 years ago. Though they seem ancient, they're actually a fairly recent boat design. And in this case, a man is fishing selection of spears, the various catch from abalone to wakame to sazae, and he's looking through a wooden box with a glass bottom, and he can see the catch, and then he grabs a bamboo spear and grabs it. This is a very, very common type of fishing in Japan. There's in fact a different verb for it. It's called isonegi. Negi is like harvesting. So versus net fishing or rod fishing, this is like fish gathering. And this is done all over the Japanese coastline. But on Sado Island, done from these unique boats. My teacher, who at the time I apprenticed with him was the last living builder of these boats, was a 3rd generation cooper, barrel maker. These are miso barrels that his grandfather and father built, and he worked in this cooperage until age 50 when he retired and decided to make tugboats. These are his tools. These are the classic tools of a cooper, a barrel maker in Japan. Patterns for the shapes of the staves, planes, chisels, marking tools, and then these homemade tools for braiding the bamboo hoops. So this is my teacher. First day in my apprenticeship, I took this photograph. He had me sit on a stool in the workshop, and for 8 hours I watched him. He told me to just watch. And at the end of the first day, he jumped up and he said, "Sweep," and he walked out. And that was the end of the day. He was making staves, and he's using one of his patterns to check the curvature of the stave. He's working on the floor, traditional in Japan. That's the workbench. He holds the work with his feet. And so day 2 was the same thing. I just sat and watched. And then halfway through day 3, he jumped up, pointed to the floor, told me to sit there, and said, "Work." And then I expected him to supervise me, and he walked out of the shop and disappeared. And so I waited, thinking he must be taking a bathroom break, and he didn't come back, so I began to work. I began to make staves, and it turned out my wife found him later, told me later, she found him taking a nap. And he came back right before the end of the day, and he took my pile of staves, and he made a pile of acceptable ones and unacceptable ones. And then he said, "Naoshite," and he walked out. Fix them. But he didn't tell me what was right with the right ones. They were good, I guess, by default, but he didn't tell me what was wrong with the bad ones. And this is, in a nutshell, Japanese apprentice pedagogy. What it does is it puts tremendous pressure on the student. Now, you're in language school, I went through this too, you know a little bit about pressure, so I have sympathy for you. So building our tugboat together, putting the outer hull together, and actually, this slide is maybe out of sequence. This is a nearly finished tugboat. My teacher died right after my apprenticeship. And a foundation on Sado Island that's run by Kodo, the taiko drumming band, they live communally on Sado Island. They contacted me and said, you were his only student. So what do we do? And I said, well, we're gonna do the traditional thing and I'm gonna teach an apprentice. So I taught this Sado Island carpenter. He and I built 2 tugboats together. And then we're gonna do the non-traditional thing and you're gonna publish my research. So, see what my next slide is. That slide was out of sequence, I apologize. The most difficult thing about building these boats is braiding the bamboo hoops. So we cut down 50-foot stalks of timber bamboo, split them, my apologies, and then braided them into hoops. This is by far the rarest craft that I possess. I think there's probably no more than 24 people left in Japan that know how to do this. This is the classic bamboo barrel hoop. My teacher, again, worked at lightning speed and did not slow down for my benefit, and it was only because I brought a video camera with me on this first apprenticeship, and my wife filmed the whole process. And after my apprenticeship, I came back to the United States, and none of you know what a VCR is, but I sat with plastic strapping tape and played my tape and rewound it easily 100 times. And I finally got it. And the kind of revelation about that for me is that I can say that braiding a Japanese bamboo barrel hoop, I know better than anything else. And I believe that's because of the way I learned it. I was desperate to learn it, and I was forced to repeat over and over and try again until I got it. And that would be like The Apprentice, because the typical boat building apprenticeship was 6 years. And so as an apprentice, you might spend the first 2 years doing nothing but sweep. But while you were sweeping, you would be seeing your teacher make those over and over and over again. And this is how the crafts have always been transmitted in Japan. So publishing this from left to right, how to braid a bamboo barrel hoop. I did a bamboo barrel hoop many years ago for a class here at Middlebury College. And I was swishing the bamboo around the classroom, 50-foot long strips. It was a lot of fun. And then these are my drawings, the first measured drawings of a tugboat ever published. So my teacher, these dimensions, which by the way are in shaku. Shaku, wakarimasu ka? Anybody know shaku? Shaku is the traditional measuring system in Japan. It comes straight from China. And shaku is a decimal system. One shaku is 10 sun, each sun is 10 bu, shaku sun bu. And rural carpenters in Japan refuse to use the metric system. And I am told there is no such thing as a metric kimono. That the people who make the bolts of fabric for kimono refuse to use the metric system and also use shaku. So you can still get tools in that in shaku. So these represent my teacher's layout. And this, in his case, these were always secrets. So here's some great vocabulary. If you meet a craftsperson in Japan, ask them what they know about nusumi gekko. Nusumi gekko. Nusumu wa, nusumu is to steal, gekko is lesson, stolen lessons. So for many Japanese craftspeople, your master unless they were a family member, your master did not teach you everything. You had to steal the essential secrets of the craft. And my teacher told me, all my teachers, well, some of my teachers had fathers for masters, but some of my teachers told me some really interesting stories about stealing their master's secrets. In this case, my teacher would sneak back into his master's workshop at night with a candle and study his layout, these layout lines. And he discovered that his teacher was drawing false lines to throw him off the track. Okay? Another boat builder I interviewed in Japan told me that when his master did layout, he pulled a sheet over himself, so the apprentice couldn't see what he was doing. But so this is really common. And if you meet a Japanese craftsperson, that's a great discussion. If you want an icebreaker, ask them about Musumi Geiko, about their own apprenticeship. So this is my first book, Building the Tugboats of Sado Island, a Japanese Craftsman's Methods, published in English and Japanese. And this happens to actually be still the only thing published on Japanese cooperage. And I happen to be quite well known among Japan's few barrel makers. And barrel making in Japan is even rarer than boat building at this point. So my next apprenticeship was in Urayasu, which is right next to Tokyo. This is the fleet of seaweed boats coming in. That's Tokyo Bay in the background. The current shoreline here is almost 2 miles further out. This whole fishing ground was destroyed by chemical spills in the 1970s. Developers bought the fishing rights and they did landfill. And if you look from this bridge today, what you see out there is Tokyo Disneylando, because Disneyland is built where these boats used to fish. These are seaweed gathering boats. And I had the opportunity to work with this man. He was the last boat builder of Urayasu, and we built a replica of one of those seaweed boats. And this is the boat. Again, built on the floor, no workbenches, all our work was on the floor, and no clamps. Everything held by props, propped overhead, propped to the side, and elsewhere. This is classic Japanese boat building. And this is my teacher's drawing. I won't get too deeply into the weeds of naval architecture, but I'll just tell you that you cannot build a boat from this because essential dimensions are missing. And so the irony in Japan is about half of Japanese boat builders use drawings, and about the other half worked entirely from memory. Easier to protect your secrets when it's all memorized. So what you lack here, you see the profile of the boat, side view of the boat, the transom, and then this lower half of the drawing, that's the overhead view of the bottom of the boat. But what's missing is what's the width or the overhead view of the chine and the shear. And if you ask a boat builder, as I did the first time I was shown a drawing, I looked at it and said, Hiromitsu-san, you can't build a boat from this. Where's the missing information? And he said, those are my secrets. Okay, so these are my drawings, same boat, those are the two missing lines that correspond with those two lines. Okay, also my teacher's patterns, we made these patterns out of scrap wood. They were for the angle of the stem, the angle of the transom, the plank angles, and he told me every time he finished one of these boats, he burned those patterns. And he built 300 of these. Okay, so again, secrecy was absolutely central to the craft. This is my Tokyo teacher. I can move quickly. This is just some of the mechanics of traditional boat building in Japan. Holding things with props from overhead, special hand saws used in boat building, and then this saw fitting technique where all the seams in the boat are fitted by propping them together and using those special hand saws and just sawing back and forth through the seam. So each time you saw through, you can tap them a little bit closer, saw through again, and each time you do that, the fit becomes better and better and better. And this is not done in the West. We would use a hand plane to fit planking. and how that's done. This technique is called suriawase. Suru, the verb to rub, awaseru, to put together. And it's got some other regional names, aibazuri and aibanoko, but suriawase. And that creates, that final rubbing motion is what creates really a watertight fit. So you see the two side planks of our Tokyo boat. All those seams have been, sawn to fit, and we're getting ready to edge nail those together. And our blacksmith made nails, a special chisel. You don't use a drill because that doesn't take a round hole, it takes a rectangular hole. So a special chisel. The nail will pass into this mortise that goes half the depth of the plank and exit here into the adjoining plank. This edge nailing, this again is unknown in the West, but can be found throughout Asia, the Indian Ocean, and elsewhere. And there we are making nail holes. And then the final step is pounding the plank edge with a hammer. You see how it's cupped slightly. That's called kigoroshi. Ki, korosu, killing the wood. And so by doing that, you put the two planks together and those compressed fibers spring back and seal that tightly. And there you're looking at sun. By the way, shaku is a joy to use. I don't know about you folks. The metric system, I can't think in the metric system. But one shaku is 11 and 15/16 inches. So one shaku is that much different than a foot. So it's a really, for me, it's a great, easy thing to adjust to. And that's a cutaway of that edge nailing process. And running horizontally across the image at the apex of that square is the joint between two planks. So when done right, that's the result. It's you can see also, you can appreciate the fit in that photo as well. So another interesting tool for setting angles, a stick with a mark 1 shaku back, a string with a boat nail that hangs vertically, and that angle is not remembered as degrees, it's remembered as the horizontal measurement from the string to the mark. And that tool is called a sagefuri, and that is found throughout Japan. And that's our Tokyo boat on launch day. And if you go to Tokyo, you can row that boat. The foundation that sponsored my research donated that boat to a wonderful volunteer group in Eastern Tokyo that on the canal teaches you the traditional sculling method. So I brought, remember, business cards are still a real thing in Japan. Take a business card. If you go to Tokyo, write me via my website, and I'll give you directions how to get to Wasen Tomonokai, Friends of Traditional Japanese Boats. And they'll teach you rowing, and you can say you met me, the builder of this boat. They know me. I'm well known there. Oh, that's way out of sequence. My apologies. Well, we may be bouncing around here. This is in Okinawa, and Okinawa is an example of the first sort of renaissance in wooden boats anywhere in Japan, very much mimicking the revival of wooden boat building in Europe and America and Oceania, which is repurposed traditional boats as a sporting event. And this is the sabani, which is the traditional fishing boat of Okinawa. Back about 20 years ago, Okinawa is kind of a magnet for Japanese hippies and, kind of surfers and that scene. And yachtsmen and surfers and windsurfers kind of rediscovered these traditional boats that hadn't been built since the 1960s. Had all been replaced by fiberglass boats, fishing boats. And they discovered these things were fun and started to race them. And that created a revival. There were only 3, as of 2010, when I apprenticed in Okinawa, there were only 3 boat builders left, all men in their 70s and 80s, who could still build these boats. And I apprenticed with one of them. And he told me, he built entirely from memory, and he told me 35 years after his last Sabani, some young people came to him and commissioned a boat. And he said, my first thought was, do I remember all the dimensions? And there you see 4 sheets of plywood there. He built 4 sizes of Sabani. And he said, I quickly drew these out and wrote out the memorized dimensions. And of course, I took those to the copy store at the Combini and copied them. Because it was a really interesting moment of a boat builder actually documenting himself. So that was an invaluable opportunity. Here is the boat. Sabani are what we would call in the West semi-dugouts. A dugout is, carved out of a single log. The Sabani is made of, a semi-dugout is made of several large pieces of wood put together and carved into a boat shape. In 200 years ago, this was done in the Chesapeake Bay, actually, in the US and elsewhere. So our side planks are being actually being hollowed out, slightly hollowed out, you can see in that photo. And then, what is going on here? And then one of the things that I wanted to do, one of the reasons I wanted to study Okinawan boat building, is that Okinawan boats are built without any metal fastenings. They're held together entirely with hardwood dovetail keys. Bending the 2 side planks together, then dropping a huge timber that will be the bottom onto the sides. And here you can see the sides clamped together, and we've carved this bottom to shape. That was made out of 3 huge pieces of cedar. And then the dovetail keys. So if you look very closely, you can see that I've carved to the corner, but here in the middle, you see the pencil line. There's a little material left. So from 0 to something to 0, haven't quite finished carving top and bottom. Wow. Yeah, the sequence is weird. And then fitting it top and bottom and actually making sure it's a little loose. And then pounding it in with the help of Mom's soybean oil. But I want you to go back. If you can imagine this, when you put that hardwood dovetail key in, the heavy parts that you left act like 4 wedges and pull those 2 planks together. And that's the secret of that fastening. And there's a look on the bottom, a dovetail key every shaku. And that's what the boat looks like. You see the dovetail keys holding the side to the bottom, a front piece and a stern piece, my teacher looking on. And then you flip it over and you put in hardwood dovetail keys on the inside, offset in between the ones on the outside. So that's how the boat is held together. You also see the beautiful sculptural shape of these boats because they're largely carved into existence. And the bow. And these pins get sawn off. And our ceremony. All ceremonies around boat building in Japan are Shinto-based. However, in Okinawa, the indigenous religion of Okinawa is practiced only by women. And she is, there's 2 levels. A Noro is the highest level. She was the second highest. She was 93 years old. She lived on the island. She was at the second level called a Yuta. And that gets translated as shaman. But what I found interesting is all these motifs here, the sake and the salt and the mochi, that's all Shinto. So I did never quite got a full understanding of the Okinawan religion, but my teacher there watching, and she's doing the blessing. By the way, if you have any questions, just sing out as you see things. Yes?
I was wondering, why would somebody go and want to commission like a big wooden boat when they have like fiberglass or carbon fiber? I just want to know like what the immediate science is behind that. Why is there a desire for that traditional wooden boat?
Well, in Okinawa, it's about now racing, you know, and so these Okinawan, these Sabani racing teams, I mean, they're only going to use a traditional boat. It's all committed to that. And it's really revived the craft. This woman on the left, while I was apprenticing with my teacher, she was apprenticing with one of the other boat builders in Okinawa. And she is now professionally building Sabani. And there's been some more apprentices come forward who've studied with the younger boat builder who's now nearly 80. My teacher has passed away. I'm not sure her teacher is still alive. He would be very old. And the last of the old guard is probably in his 80s now. And I'll tell you a funny story about him. He didn't have a workshop, and so the Okinawan sort of traditional boat museum created a workshop for him. And that was great, and he got an apprentice, and they were building a Sabani together. And the curator told me they set up a time-lapse camera to film the whole process. And when they finished the boat, the curator downloaded the photographs, and he was going through them, and there was a photograph of the boat builder approaching the camera like this. And then it went black. And it stayed black, and then the boat reappeared again. And when he asked the boat builder about it, he said, I can't show you my secrets. You know, this is a really, really, it's a tension. And it's been a tension in my research, you know, giving away the secrets. Yes?
Yeah, I was going to ask about, you talked a lot about how it's really important to keep the secrets. How do your teachers feel about you, like, publishing secrets?
Well, in almost every case, they felt fine. And I realized I came along at exactly the right moment. All of my teachers, I've had 9 teachers, by the way, and I'm the sole apprentice for 7 of my 9 teachers. So you see where the craft is going. When a craft depends on the master-apprentice relationship, if you lose a generation of apprentices, you lose the whole thing. Okay? So I stepped into that void and said, everything's got to get written down. Everything's got to get photographed. Everything's got to get videotaped. Everything's got to get published. And all my teachers were in their 70s and 80s when I approached them and I worked with them. And I realized in retrospect, my timing was perfect because they had all come to this realization of what was about to be lost. So my Tokyo teacher was a 4th generation boat builder. He had 5 sons, but they all went and got jobs with Panasonic or the train system. You know, they got corporate or urban or modern Japanese jobs. And he realized I came along, and basically I was his last chance. He was incredibly proud of his family's lineage and history of boat building. This all came together for me a few years ago. I met an 85-year-old boat builder in Yamaguchi, Ken. And he and I were talking, and I was in the shop, and I was asking my usual questions and kind of doing my usual interview with him. And in the middle of it, he just stopped and he looked at me and he said, you know, 15 years ago, I would have thrown you out of here. And I was sort of so shocked at the, you know, how blunt and abrupt that was. And then he said, but now it's time to document me. And that was amazing to hear a craftsperson say that. So I think it was a matter of timing. If my teachers had been in their 50s and 60s, maybe some of them. And one of my teachers had a last-minute objection, and we had a very interesting conversation. There's the Sabani race I attended in 2017. So there's 35 teams there. And they do a 26-mile open ocean race from Zamami Island to the capital of Naha. Yes?
Is there a certain type of wood that's most commonly used?
Yeah, sugi, Japanese cedar, is by far the most common wood used in boat building in Japan. Yeah.
Do you make the sails as well?
No, the sails were made by,
The sails are different.
yeah, the sails are beautiful. They're made by professional sail makers. And you can actually see there are a combination of old boats and brand new boats because the Sabani is such a thick hull, actually 40, 50, 60-year-old boats still survive. And so some teams find them and restore them, which is great. Another apprenticeship. This is a photo I took in Iwate in 2003. This is exactly where the tsunami struck in 2011. That coastline had more wooden boats than any place I've seen in Japan. And I've been to all 47 prefectures, by the way. And so when the tsunami struck, they say that 90% of all boats were destroyed in the disaster. So after the tsunami, of course, I checked in on the boat builders I knew on that coastline, and I got confirmation from 2 of them, but I never heard from the third one that I knew. But I began to raise money. It took 4 years, but I felt like it was imperative to document. This was the most common boat of that coastline, and I felt like it was imperative to document that boat because all this material culture was destroyed. I mean, of course, the loss of life was so much worse, but anyway, it finally came to pass that I got to work with the last builder of these boats. And the tsunami actually put him back in business because so many fishermen had lost their boats. He actually built 20 boats in the wake of the tsunami. Then we did our project together. Very interesting man. He literally didn't say a single word. And one day, didn't have plans, and one day while I happened to be watching him, he took my bevel gauge and he walked over to the wall of the shop and he put it up against that beam. And I thought, what is he doing? All the angles in the boat were recorded on a beam in the shop. Of course, they're not labeled, but there they are. Pretty effective. I mean, I took the shop, when you're using the props overhead, the shop is like a tool unto itself. But here, the shop was the plans, yes.
How long does it usually take to build a boat, like from start to finish?
So the tugboat, my teacher could build one in 5 days. We spent a little over a week. In Tokyo, that boat you saw, that took 6 months to build. So it varies on the complexity. We built this boat in 9 days. This was extraordinary.
Question.
Yes.
Couldn't somebody like order a boat and then just reverse engineer it?
Yes, you could do that. Yes, you could do that. But so many of the techniques wouldn't be available to you. You know, there's still, yeah.
So like if you had a boat, you couldn't necessarily create a second one.
Right, and I have done some of that reverse engineering. I've measured boats, historic boats, in Japan, and I'd like to go back and do more of that. I'd like to get another big grant to do more of that. So here's my teacher laying down the lines from memory. I'm desperately following him with my notebook and my tape measure, and then bending with fire. This is bending the bottom of the boat 2 inches thick, propped it under his house, over a log, and then shoved these boulders up on the end. And each of these posts was progressively shorter, and so every 15 minutes he put the next shortest post in. And the weight of the stones, and we kept splashing water. My job was to splash water so it didn't burn the bottom of the boat. But that's how wood is bent throughout Asia. In the West, we use steam. You make a box, a steam box, you put the plank in there, you steam it, you pull it out and bend it. So, different technology. There's our boat. Note the dirt floor shop. the use of the props, and so on. And now, it's going to be hard, the quiz section, quiz portion of our lecture. So there's the back of the boat, the transom. And like a lot of Japanese boats, the planks run past the transom. That's not seen in the West. He came over here and he pulled a measurement to that point, and he stood where I am, and he saw that angle. He didn't make any other line on the boat, just the mark up here. Then he went over the other side, he made the same mark, and he started sawing the other side, and I could see that what he was doing was aiming at the first cut to match it. Question: how did he get the first angle? And I have provided you all the information you need. Yes?
Did you say they use a horizontal measurement with the tool to calculate the angle instead of the...
In this case, he did not use that tool.
Written on the wall.
No, he didn't use any pattern.
Is there a mark on the wall?
Yeah, he's really good at building boats. Actually, I think it was a wild guess, and you know what? Well, it was written on the wall. Yeah, okay. Was it a wild guess, or did you see that line?
I would say from the clues that you gave us.
Okay. So yes,
You
so
sowed the seeds very well.
once again, the information was on the shop wall. So he lined up his saw, I mean, it's very crude. He lined up his saw with that line and cut. So. And that's the finished boat. And I'll tell you a funny story. We had the launching there. It was a little tiny village, and he invited the local fishermen. There were just about 8 people there. And the local fishermen, who all knew him, said, "You got to make Murakami-san, you got to make a speech. You got to make a speech. You got to make a speech." And this is the sum total of his speech. Brooks-san understood 95% of how to build this boat. And I am not going to tell him what the 5% is that he does not understand. That was it. Anyway, you know, and the important thing to understand about this apprentice learning is, again, I'm repeating myself, but it puts all of the onus on the apprentice. And this, again, I have come to believe and appreciate this is a very powerful way to learn. I mean, you know, it's not unlike the language pledge, right? Sort of throws you in the deep end. Yes?
That's why we can't find any new apprentices.
In Japan, so in Japan, I think it's very interesting. You can agree or disagree with me. I think shokunin, craftspeople, are held in great esteem because I think most Japanese people understand what they've been through, right? But of course, in an ironic twist, how many of you would do a 6-year unpaid apprenticeship?
Without a guild? No way.
Without a union contract? No way, right? So, you know, it kind of sowed the seeds for its own destruction that, yeah, I mean, there were so many more opportunities, better opportunities. And there are a lot of really living crafts that are really at risk now because they can't find apprentices. It's actually an incredibly fertile time to do this in Japan. Not necessarily with boat building, but with other crafts. And if anybody's interested in a craft, let me know. I might be able to provide some contacts for you. So on to Gifu. This was 2017. This is a cormorant fishing boat, and you're probably aware of fishing with birds, right? This is a 1,300-year-old tradition in Japan, and goes back at least another 1,000 years before that in China. This comes from China, comes to Japan. Little known fact, Marco Polo took this back to Venice. Briefly, they were fishing with cormorants in Venice. Didn't last long. So in Gifu, the most famous place where this is done, the traditions are clung to tenaciously. It's hard to see, but he's in a completely traditional costume, the usho, the fisherman, including this kind of grass skirt. Everything is done. I mean, you can look at a 500-year-old woodblock print and it looks just like this. You know, the fishermen there, it's a hereditary job. There are only 6 usho in Gifu, and they pass this on to their sons. In Uji, there is Japan's first female cormorant fisherwoman, and her new apprentice is also female. So a good break in the tradition in Uji, which is just south of Kyoto. So I built this boat. I had asked this builder for 15 years if I could apprentice with it. And he said no every time, until he said yes. In 2016, he actually informed me, he said, I can't build these boats anymore. And he looked at me, and he had realized there's no next person. And he said to me, I cannot do any of the physical labor. I will lay down the lines, you will do all the physical labor. Are you good with that? And I said yes. So, built this boat, and he didn't have drawings, he had these. What are these for? And again, like the patterns, I've never seen a pattern like this. I've never seen another one like this. Even as an experienced boat builder, I had no clue what these were. So again, if you lose a boat builder and you walk into his or her shop, the patterns are useless because they're not labeled. So that pattern is for setting the bevel on the edge of the bottom of the boat. And I'm going to show a little video, and I'm going to turn my volume up. We don't have a fancy projector, so please listen carefully. And you're going to watch my teacher right before he puts the nail in. He's going to lick it. He's going to lick it. He insisted I lick every nail, and there were 963 nails in this boat, and he pre-rusted them because a rusty nail holds better because it's got a rough surface. Okay, so you'll see him lick it, and then you'll see a very interesting thing the way he pounds a nail. And listen carefully. Sorry. Very licked. You see how tired he is, the one nail. Here's some of the rarest Japanese vocabulary you'll ever hear. That playing a rhythm, that's called uguisu no tani watari. Anybody know what uguisu is? Yes, good for you. Almost, the bush warbler. It's a bird. No tani watari. To cross the valley. So the bush warbler is a Japanese bird that makes multiple nests. And so they're famous for this frenetic flying back and forth. And that's supposedly evocative of this rhythmic nailing. I'll show you a boat builder in Nagano. Very different style. So, about a third of Japanese boat builders do this. The other 2/3 think this is BS. They do. A couple of my teachers did it. One of my teachers, my teacher in Urayasu, and I wish I've got old video and I've got it digitized and I need to edit it and put a clip in. He could go up on, he could have played Carnegie Hall. He literally was a musician. He was literally a musician. Absolutely amazing when he played. And they all say, to justify it, that the nail, because it's edge nailing, it's easy to split the plank, so the nail has to be driven, not with this bang, 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 but with this controlled, slow fashion. That's their justification. I personally think they do it because it's fun. My Urayasu teacher told me, his wife told me, that the neighbors used to come listen when he was nailing boats together. It was so entertaining. So a really interesting thing. And I've actually shared this with some ethnomusicologists who are really quite interested in it because nobody yet has found any corollary to this. And I have a video, if you email me, I have a video of Tokyo candy cutters, and they're doing the same thing. And I can send you that video, and I can send you some other videos of this practice. It's quite infectious. It's a lot of fun. It is fun, even though my teachers would disagree. So this is the cormorant boat coming together. 963 nails. Like I say, all these are nails holding it together. The use of staples in lieu of clamps, and then the props. This boat is 42 feet long, and I planed it entirely by hand, inside and out. We only used hand tools and then a little circular saw. Pretty remarkable boat. It's only got one beam in the middle from an engineering standpoint. It's absurd. But as my teacher told me, that the fishermen demand the lightest possible boat because they sometimes are going through white water and they got to lift them over rapids and things like that. Yes?
You said plane boat, what does that mean?
Oh, plane. To take a hand plane and smooth that wood with a hand, kanna. Kezu. My most recent apprenticeship in 2019, right before COVID, was building the Shinano riverboat in Niigata. Interesting now, these last two apprenticeships, both in Niigata and Toyama, both my teachers in their 80s, they apprenticed with their fathers and built wooden boats, and then in their late 20s were forced to switch to other materials. So they literally caught the end of that era. This man then made steel boats, and my teacher in Toyama made fiberglass boats. And now in retirement or in old age, they're coming back to building wooden boats. So we got a series of grants, and I was able to do this. My apprentice came with me. Nina is from the Apprentice Shop, which is America's oldest boat building school in Rockland, Maine, and I'm working with them on trying to establish a boat building program in Japan. So I brought Nina with me to see what Japanese boat building is like. So see her fitting the side to the bottom with the handsaw. This is urushi, lacquer, raw lacquer. This was used by traditional boat builders before glue to just kind of put something sticky between the planks. It happens to be poisonous. Nina and I both got poisoned. Urushi is urushiol. It's poison ivy. It's like the worst poison ivy ever. You mix it with panko, which is the tempura batter, and there you get this sticky brown stuff. My teacher, barehanded, is immune to it. And lacquer workers in Japan develop an immunity. And it's believed that they pass that immunity to their children. I'm not so sure that's true. I mean, and in fact, a Japanese person told me that the reason chopsticks got lacquered was so that as children you would be. Are you going to agree with me on that, please?
No, Native Americans has this tradition where, as a young boy or a young girl, they would rub their skin surface with poison ivy, so that they would over time develop
an immunity.
This is a very
Yeah. It's I was told that the reason for lacquered chopsticks is to, in children, get them exposed and develop an immunity. Yeah, it's ferocious. It's horrible. We were rashes all over our bodies for like 3 weeks. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Real interesting. He had a very interesting technique for laying out the sides of the boat that I had never seen before. And that's Nina, and actually one of my former students here at Middlebury College who came with us, who did a video and photographic documentation, and that's our boat. And that's the boat I teach in my college classes. Then Toyama, using the Sage Furi to set the angle of the transom. This is the drawing we worked from. And this, he told us, was his grandfather's. And drawn on a plank of wood, itazu. Ita, plank, zu men, drawing, itazu. And you can go in rural Japan to a house building site and meet a rural carpenter who will have that house drawn on a plank of wood. And you can find, in museum collections, all the great temples drawn on planks of wood, because paper was too impermanent on a job site. But this drawing, very difficult to read, it also has missing information, which my teacher knew the secrets. The joinery, saw fitting, the bow. I'll just rush you through this. In the Sea of Japan, they build this kind of box structure at the bow. This is kind of unique to the Sea of Japan and down in Kyushu, and it's what I was really interested in learning. Nina bending, Bancho-san bending the plank while Nina plays a propane torch. So a kind of updated version of the fire bending. Kind of a crazy obstacle course. And we're getting close to our finished boat. And our launching ceremony. So Shinto-based, yet conducted by the boat builder. Most are conducted by the boat builder. If somebody's wealthy enough, they can hire a Shinto priest. I've been part of both. And now we're wrapping up, run you by, this is my first class here at Middlebury College. Middlebury has a winter term, a 4-week term, so I have a class called Ways of Learning Building the Japanese Boat. And we try to conduct this entirely in silence. So saw fitting, launching ceremony, it's winter, it's Vermont, so we're at the swimming pool. And our Shinto, she's pouring sake on the bow and stern, purifying the boat with salt. And anybody familiar with kiribi? Kiribi, sparks? We strike sparks on the boat, and it's called kiribi, and that's an old tradition of providing safety and blessing and purification. And then our boat. This boat is from the Hozu River outside of Kyoto that flows through Kyoto. This is an ayubune. Ayu are that little freshwater fish that the Japanese love to grill. So ayubune from Kyoto. Our second class at Middlebury, this is a 27-foot boat, river boat from the other side of Niigata Prefecture, and in the swimming pool with the sculling paddle. And my last boat building class here at Middlebury, they're making the nail holes with the special chisels. This is planing, okay? Anybody ever seen the planing contests in Japan? Kezurokai, where they get, the winner is the thinnest shaving. They get shavings down like 6 microns with a Japanese hand plane. Email me, take a card, email me, I'll send you some Kezurokai videos. They're amazing. But we're not winning here, but she was great. She was a natural with a hand plane. and that boat with the entire class in it. And those boats went on display. That's the little boat that's still in the basement of the library. Bates College, we built 2 Shinano River boats. And Bates conveniently they do their short term at the end of the school year, so nice weather, and they conveniently have a little pond on campus. Very recently at University of Illinois, where they have a program, Japan House. If you're ever in Champaign-Urbana, it's an amazing program. They teach tea ceremony. They have a traditional Japanese building and a Japanese garden. So they sponsored this class, and these are some of the shrine objects that we use at the launching ceremony. Paper dolls, goen, because goen sounds like the word for good fortune, and homemade dice. And the dice have to be arranged in a particular way. And there's our boat launching. And then most recently, just 2 weeks ago, I finished a boat at Deep Springs College, Deep Springs, California, and building that and launching at 5,000 foot elevation in the desert in an irrigation pond. It was the only body of water for 35 miles. Yeah, very dry. So that's my book. One of 5 books I have, with another book coming out in the fall on how to build the cormorant fishing boat. There should be a copy of this in the Davis Library, and I'm happy to throw this open to questions. So, thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Coming from my father was a carpenter, so a lot of this is really, really interesting to me to see these different techniques being used. And so I have 2 questions. My first question is, what got you into this? Why did you start to do this, and what kept you going in doing this pursuit? It seems like you're sort of doing this type of experience. It's really an experiential sort of education when you're building something like that. And so my second question, as somebody who's an aspiring academic, is more of an academic question. It's I wonder, sorts of what types of, are you interested also in the culture surrounding this? It seems like there's a lot to deal with ritual. There's a lot to deal with, in the transition from, I wonder if these racing boats too, there was some sort of pragmatic use for them earlier on that wasn't just racing or something like that, and this sort of transition over time. So that would be my second question, is what types of things did you see from a more cultural, anthropological, if you will, perspective?
So hopefully I catch all those. Ask me again if I don't. All the boats you saw today are fishing boats. Traditional fishing boats, except that Tokyo boat. That Tokyo boat was an Edo era water taxi. So Edo, old Tokyo, had as many canals as Venice. And the Chokki-bune, Chokki, anybody know what that means? Bune is boat, Chokki. Ooh, it's kind of oddly close. Chokki. You are amazingly close, but not right. The chokki is the tusk of a boar. Inoshishi no ha. Okay? And the bow of the boat, as she rightly said, that steep bow of the boat, which is built for speed, is reminiscent of the tusk of a boar. And that is a very romantic boat. Just as the gondola is an iconic boat of Venice, the Chokki-bune it shows up in early Japanese novels and as this romantic boat taking samurai to the pleasure quarters and this kind of thing, and geisha and stuff like that. So that was a water taxi. All the others are fishing boats. And that answers that question. As far as a greater ethnology, I'm a boat builder, and my focus is the techniques, the design and the techniques, because I feel it's imperative to preserve that while it can still be recorded. But, of course, I record the ceremonies, I'm very proud of the fact that in the back of my book is the only published glossary of Japanese boat building terms. So if you want to greatly expand your vocabulary and be able to talk to a boat builder. My Japanese is not that great. I don't give myself that I have great Japanese, but what I say to people is, I'm beyond native speaker when I'm talking to a boat builder about boats. And I've had many situations in Japan where I'm talking to a boat builder and a native Japanese speaker is there, and when we finish talking, that person says to me, I didn't understand a word you said. And also, you know, there's a lot of regional dialects, so I actually have a glossary for each boat, because as you travel through Japan, the words change. You know, in Okinawa, it's all completely different terminology from Aomori. You know, and Aomori has its infamous dialect anyway. So yes, I am interested in the ceremonies, the tool use and the tool making and that sort of thing. I do not go much beyond that, okay? As far as how I got into this, I was post-college. I have a degree in philosophy from Trinity College in Hartford, also studied at the University of Oregon. And I wound up as the museum boat builder at the Maritime Museum in San Francisco on Fisherman's Wharf. So I was curating traditional American boats, building boats in front of the public, teaching workshops and that sort of thing. But my roommate at the University of Oregon was from Hiroshima. And for 10 years after graduation, he begged me to come to Japan. And I had no interest. And then I left my job in San Francisco. I wrote him a letter, pre-email. I wrote him a letter and told him what I was up to, that I was footloose. And 2 weeks later, I got a plane ticket with a note that said, now you have no excuse. And so in 1990, I went to Japan. I had a Lonely Planet travel guide, I had a rail pass, and I had a youth hostel membership and a backpack. So I was like 10,000 other, I was a little older, but I was like 10,000 other young people traipsing around Japan. And I saw a photo of a taraibune, a tugboat. And I was so taken with it that I tore it out of this magazine and I took it to Hiroshima and I showed it to my college roommate and said, what's that caption say? And he looked at it and said, it says Sato Island, village of Ogi. And I said, right then, I got out my youth hostel map and I found Sato and I went there. And I saw all those boats. I met the two craftspeople still making them. And I realized, I got a sense of the situation was that there were no apprentices. And that I was hooked. And I went back 2 more times with interpreters, specifically to interview Mr. Fuji about his work. And this is really quite interesting. He couldn't talk about it. Again, silence. Like he couldn't verbalize his craft. Like we were at his kitchen table and he kept saying, come on into the shop, I'll show you. And on that 3rd visit, I realized you can't do it this way. The only way to record this craft is to get inside it as an apprentice. And so I turned to my interpreter, who I'd hired to come out from Tokyo with me, and I said, I want to ask Mr. Fuji if I could be his apprentice. And she said to me, that is absolutely unthinkable. You don't speak Japanese, you're a foreigner, you don't do that. You know, you're just breaking every rule that is wrong, wrong, wrong. So I kept my mouth shut. And Mr. Fuji came to our Minshuku in the middle of the night, our last night on the island, and woke everybody up and sat us down at the kitchen table and asked me to be his apprentice. So that kicked it off. And what sustained it? My stubbornness and grant funding. So the hardest thing about my work is raising the funding. Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, just kind of speaking to that, besides the difficulties adjusting to the apprenticeship, specifically like as a foreigner coming from a different culture, what were some of the biggest cultural barriers at first that you kind of had to overcome?
Well, I think the first, when you go to, in my opinion, when you first go to Japan, there's a couple traps you can fall into. One interesting thing in language school, this is 22 years ago, so you're not responsible for this. In the first year, they spent the final third of the summer term on formal Japanese, and they kept saying to us, "You have got to speak formal Japanese." And so they hammered formal, like we were barely getting informal Japanese. We were barely hanging on to that, and they hammered formal Japanese into us. And I got to Japan, nobody spoke that. Nobody. And I think in a funny way, a trap people can fall into is there's so much ritual formalism in Japan, and it's all in urban Japan. That you can drive yourself crazy trying to match that. And I think one of the nice things about Japan is you're kind of forgiven, because the Japanese sort of think, well, you're a gaijin, you don't get this stuff. So you kind of get a pass. And that's a good thing. But you will drive yourself crazy. You'll want to do everything right. Having said that, Japan is a culture obsessed with politeness. And you, as young people, are a very impolite bunch. You are. You are a very informal bunch. And I get emails from folks like you, from strangers, that begin, "Hey," instead of "Dear Mr. Brooks." And I do think of my own experiences in Japan, and I think, that person's never getting invited to be in France. And so if you go to Japan, when you go to Japan, treat everyone like your beloved grandmother. I once said in the workshop in Tokyo, "Suge." And my teacher put his tools down and sat me down and said, "I do not ever want to hear such bad Japanese from you." And this was like a, uneducated working class guy. But it was like, you are not going to be young culture. And so again, and actually Japanese have said to me, "Why do you speak like my grandfather?" And it's because all my language teachers were in their 80s. And I speak an old-fashioned Japanese. I'll give you an example. What do you call the tool you use to hit a nail? In Japanese? You all say hama. Hama. Genno. Drives me crazy that they've anglicized. It's a genno. Do you know genno? None of my teachers said hama. They had no idea what that was. So there's that. The biggest mistake I made was I had more than one teacher. In Japanese culture, in the arts and crafts, you have a forever fealty to one teacher. Now, if any of you have studied martial arts, like the stories I've heard about Aikido, like if you try to go to a rival dojo, and all that stuff, that's exactly mirrored in the Japanese crafts. And I would argue that no Japanese person could have done what I did. And that's a perfect example of where I, as a foreigner, were granted a pass. But a few of my teachers had a really hard time with that. They had a really hard time with the fact that I had multiple teachers. And I felt bad about that. So, yes?
Can you talk a little about the aesthetic functions of the boats themselves? Like, how much thought was put into the decorations and the designs of it?
Yeah, that's my teacher's family mark, 4 generations in Tokyo. That's the kaze guruma, the pinwheel. And he didn't know why 4 generations ago his family chose that. But he actually showed me a photograph from the 1880s of a fishing boat in Tokyo Bay, and you could see it. You could see that on the boat. He said, my family built that boat. So all boat builders signed their boats in funny ways with geometric designs like that and other ways. Aesthetics, I think that runs around boat building around the world, that aesthetics are important. My teachers were designers, and they did talk about beauty. And they basically said, and I think you could go anywhere in the world and a boat builder would say this, if it looks good, it is good. So we talked about the beauty of the boat in terms of laying out lines, so things were sweeping and beautiful. And so there was an aesthetic, but in terms of the design of the boats, it was also a very interesting collaboration between the clients and the boat builders. Like the Cormorant boat, my teacher acknowledged these boats are too lightly built and they only last 10 years. But the customer demands this lightweight boat, so you have that play going on. Yeah, and then the biggest change for my teachers was the advent of motors. So the designs changed slightly. These were everything you saw was originally a human-powered boat. I mean, the Sabani in Okinawa has always been a human-powered boat. But with the advent of engines, they had to change the design slightly for that. But that was the only major design. Very, 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 very tied to tradition. And innovation came very slowly. It's not there, but it's a very slow process. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk and for coming and making the time to really share a lot of new vocabulary and just new stuff with us.
I got lots of vocabulary.
I'm taking advantage of being able to speak English for a moment to just ask. You showed us what looks like a very individual process. What you showed us was a master and an apprentice, and maybe it's a single person working on a boat with maybe one other person in the workshop.
Right.
And maybe for small boats that's the way it is, and maybe it's not. Maybe it is more people are involved. But I guess could you speak to other processes in boat building where kind of what would the workshop look like? Were there, for instance, say a naval boat of a military a naval force or something, but not so much military. How would a larger workshop look, and does anything of that kind exist today, or are these really solitary kind of professions?
So what? I'm gonna. Sorry. No. I'm gonna try to find something as I talk. So they were fishing boats, small scale fishing boats were typically built by one, sometimes families. Okay. So there might be two brothers or a brother and a cousin with a couple of apprentices. But typically very small scale. I want to talk about as far as large scale, there were shipyards, but once World War II ended, all the materials changed and things turned into steel shipbuilding, or fiberglass was the big thing. Come on. Wow. Yeah, I want to show you this. I keep this in another lecture, but we'll run through it. But the last large-scale wooden boat building was done by this man. And so the average boat building apprenticeship was 6 years. And the thing I will say that I've discovered is that the level of craftsperson that emerged from that kind of training is really quite mind-boggling. This man made 20-foot fishing boats in the tsunami zone, that same region. He lived right near the man I apprenticed with. He spent his whole life making 20-foot fishing boats. He made this bentwood vase, he made this inlaid valise, and he built this. Oh. He's Japan's only builder, these are Edo era replica ship.
You built, you can't do that by yourself.
So he had a team, and I want to get to the team because that's a great story. He built 4 of these. When I interviewed him, he said, "This is the culmination of my life's work. this was my dream. I wanted to relearn the secrets of the old shipbuilders. These disappeared. These were actually legally or made illegal. These were mandated against about 1900. The Meiji government said, no more of this. We got to catch up to the West. And it was outlawed to build these. But these existed from the beginning of the Edo era, basically the 17 and 1800s. This one was built for the port of Osaka. There's a historic photo, loaded with rice. These are called Sengoku Bune. They have a bunch of names. One name is Sengoku Bune, 1,000 koku ship. What's a koku?
It's a price that you pay to a samurai on a fee for the traditional rice pieces.
Oh, yeah, you got that. Yes, but, okay, good.
Yeah.
Correct. But what is a koku?
The amount of rice.
How much rice?
Less than an oku.
A koku, and actually you can find out how many pounds or kilograms that is. A koku was the amount of rice needed to feed one adult for 1 year. So this is 1,000 koku, and it was the measure, the volumetric measure of rice. So I got to stay in the shipyard. This is his 4th and final boat, right before launching. And really just extraordinary what this man did. And he spent his life researching these boats, and then was able to build 4 of them over a period of about 20 years.
These pictures though, could you, just for the lay person, because I don't know much about boats, and I don't have the right word, but could you show the whole line? What would sit below the water and what would sit above the water?
The black is below the water line.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
and now the black is below the water. There's the boat at sea. Yeah. One interesting thing, you see a slight gap. These sails are vertical panels laced together loosely. And that has always been a standard measurement. And he said one of the clues for me was I studied old photographs, and that provided my scale. Because that measurement has never changed. That was understood. And the brilliance of that is when the wind picks up, the sail spreads apart and spills the wind automatically. So it's kind of a self-reefing method. So anyway, to build these boats, this is my favorite thing, to build this one, he formed a crew of boat builders from Tohoku, because he lived in Iwate, Ofunato. And the group that built this, it was 15 craftspeople, built it in 11 months. Their average age was 69. And that boat is 100 feet long and 100 tons. Yes?
Are these boats out on the water now, or are they like in
No, unfortunately, this boat has come ashore. The boat he built on Sato Island is has always been a static onshore thing. The first boat he built in Iwate is in the water, but no longer operated. It actually survived the tsunami. Only 2 boats in the harbor survived the tsunami, and this one was one of them. And then this boat had been housed, and it underwent sea trials because no one was alive who knew how to sail one of these. And so the Japanese Nautical Research Association sailed this boat for 3 weeks, and the boat outperformed every expectation. It was a really interesting, I wrote a book chapter about it. And there have been several papers published in English about the sea trials. But then this boat was put inside the Osaka Maritime Museum, which went bankrupt. And I've just heard that a group is going to put this boat back in the water. So that's good news. So anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned you've written a lot of books, and it seems like a lot of them are about kind of the building process
Yes.
and kind of guides. Is there any particular book that has more of an overview of kind of your journey and less of the technical things? And more?
The book I showed you, Japanese Wooden Boat Building, has a lot of my stories. my wife keeps badgering me that I have to write the book just of my stories. And maybe someday I'll tackle that, but there are too many boats to write about. I can also, if your reading level is good, email me again. My book on building the cormorant fishing boat was originally published in Japanese, and I could send you, there's a link to a free download, or I could send it to you and you could distribute it so you could read through that. But I'm going to bring out an English version of that this fall. So, yeah. Yes? Well, we'll get to all three of you. Let's go to a new person.
A bit of a specific question, but when bending the wood via with fire, is the wood treated with something to avoid it just set? Okay.
No. So the apprentice has got a little ladle and is furiously wetting the plank. That's my job, to keep it from burning. But it gets burned. It does get charred. And then in some cases, my teacher had me plane that clean. And in other cases, my teacher just left it. The charring was just left. It was no big deal.
How long does that process take?
We bent that 2-inch thick bottom. We bent in exactly 90 minutes. I was recording every 15 minutes because I wanted to know how to do that, because I had to do that. I built that same boat at the Takenaka Carpentry Tools Museum in Kobe a year later, and I needed to know how to do that. Terrifying. But the Japanese use their wood air dried 1 year. So 1 year from milling, just leave it air dry, then use it for boat building. And Japan is a very humid place, so the wood has a fairly high moisture content.